Marina Voss stood in the doorway of her husband's home office, holding a birthday card that wasn't meant for her. The cheerful cartoon characters smiled up at her, and in a child's careful handwriting, the words, "Happy Birthday, Daddy," were scrawled across the bottom. Below that, in purple crayon, a stick figure family showed a man, woman, and little girl holding hands under a rainbow. The signature read, "Love Emma, age 6. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marina had never heard of anyone named Emma. She and Alex had no children. The card had fallen from behind Alex's computer monitor when she tried to straighten his chronically messy desk, a small gesture of care that had just shattered her world into 1,000 pieces. Her hands trembled as she turned the card over, finding an address label from somewhere called Maplewood Elementary School in San Antonio. They lived in Austin. Alex's business trips to San Antonio happened twice a month, every month for the past 3 years. Marina's expertise in cybersecurity and digital forensics had made her hyper-aware of digital footprints and hidden information, but somehow she'd missed the biggest deception happening right under her nose. The irony wasn't lost on her that the woman who helped corporations uncover data breaches and digital fraud had been completely blind to her own husband's duplicity. The birthday card slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the hardwood floor as memories began reshaping themselves in her mind. Every late-night conference call that couldn't be interrupted. Every weekend business trip that seemed essential. Every time Alex had accused her of being suspicious and paranoid when she'd asked simple questions about his schedule. The phrase he'd used just last week echoed in her mind with new meaning. "Marina, you don't trust me, and that's toxic for our marriage. I need space to do my job without feeling like I'm under surveillance." Now she understood why Emma's second family had trusted him completely. They probably had no idea his first family existed. 8 years earlier, Marina had been working late in the university computer lab when the overhead lights suddenly cut out, plunging the room into darkness except for the glow of dozens of computer screens. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in an eerie amber glow. And that's when she'd noticed Alex for the first time. He was sitting 3 computers away, completely unfazed by the power outage, typing away on what appeared to be a complex programming project. Most students had immediately started packing up their belongings, muttering complaints about the building's ancient electrical system. But Alex remained focused on his screen as if nothing had happened. Marina had been debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code for her advanced cybersecurity class, and his calm concentration in the middle of chaos intrigued her. "Doesn't the flickering emergency lighting bother you?" she'd asked, gathering the courage to break the studious silence that had settled over the nearly empty lab. Alex had looked up with a smile that made her forget about the code that had been frustrating her for hours. "I learned to program during power outages at my grandmother's house in rural Oklahoma. This is actually better lighting than I had back then." "What are you working on that's so important it can't wait for normal electricity?" Marina had asked, moving closer to see his screen. "Security protocols for a local nonprofits database. They got hacked last month and lost 3 years of donor information. I'm volunteering to rebuild their system," Alex had explained, his fingers never stopping their dance across the keyboard. "What about you? Still here at midnight on a Friday suggest either dedication or desperation." Marina had laughed despite her frustration. "Desperation. I'm trying to create a program that can detect unique data access patterns, but something in my algorithm keeps creating false positives." Alex had tilted his head, studying her code with genuine interest. "May I?" he'd asked, gesturing toward her screen. 20 minutes later, he'd identified the logic error that had been plaguing her for days. More importantly, he'd explained the fix in a way that taught her something new about pattern recognition algorithms. They'd talked until campus security came through at 2 a.m., forcing everyone to leave the building. "Coffee tomorrow?" Alex had asked as they'd walked toward the parking garage together. "Only if you can explain why your nonprofit security project looked suspiciously like a dating app interface," Marina had replied with a grin. Alex had stopped walking and stared at her with surprise. "How did you know what you were looking at from that quick glance?" "I notice things. It's kind of my specialty." In that case, I definitely need to buy you coffee. Someone with observation skills like that could probably teach me a few things. Their first coffee date lasted 6 hours. Marina had discovered that Alex's combination of technical brilliance and genuine desire to help others matched her own passion for using technology to solve problems. He'd been working on the nonprofit security project for free because he believed technology should protect the vulnerable rather than exploit them. She'd been developing her pattern recognition software to help small businesses identify cyber threats they couldn't afford to hire experts to detect. They'd both grown up in families where money was tight, but education was paramount.
Alex's grandmother had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12, and she'd insisted he pursue computer science despite having no understanding of technology herself. Marina's parents had immigrated from Romania when she was 5, and they'd sacrificed everything to ensure she could attend university without accumulating crushing debt. My grandmother used to say that people who survive difficult childhoods either become incredibly strong or incredibly broken. Alex had told her during that first conversation. I decided early on that I wanted to be strong. My parents taught me that the best way to honor their sacrifices was to use my skills to make the world a little bit safer, Marina had replied. Cybersecurity seemed like the perfect way to do that. By their third date, they discovered they shared the same vision of building a consulting firm that would help smaller organizations protect themselves against cyber threats. Large corporations could afford expensive security teams, but nonprofits, schools, and small businesses were often left vulnerable to attacks that could destroy their operations. We could be partners, Alex had suggested one evening as they'd worked side by side in the computer lab solving different problems, but sharing the comfortable silence of two people completely absorbed in work they loved. Your pattern recognition expertise and my system architecture background would be perfect complementary skills. Business partners or life partners? Marina had asked, looking up from her screen to find Alex watching her with an expression that made her heart skip. I was hoping for both, actually. They'd graduated together, moved in together, and started Vertex Security Solutions for Marina's one-bedroom apartment. Those early years had required 18-hour workdays, a diet consisting primarily of instant ramen and determination, and sleeping on a mattress in the living room because the bedroom had been converted into their office space. But they'd been building something meaningful together, and every small success had felt like validation of their shared vision. Marina's specialty had quickly become forensic analysis of data breaches, helping clients understand exactly how their systems had been compromised and what information had been accessed. She developed a reputation for finding evidence that other investigators missed, tracking down the subtle digital footprints that revealed the true scope of cyber attacks. Alex had focused on designing robust defense systems, creating layered security protocols that could adapt to new threats. His systems had prevented dozens of attacks against their clients, and his reputation for innovative solutions had grown throughout the Austin tech community. Their personal relationship had deepened alongside their professional partnership. They'd supported each other through the inevitable frustrations of entrepreneurship, celebrated each other's successes, and developed the kind of shorthand communication that made them incredibly effective both as business partners and as a couple. The proposal had happened in the same computer lab where they'd met during a late-night session when they'd returned to use the university's specialized equipment for a particularly complex forensic investigation. Alex had gotten down on one knee next to the same computer where Marina had first asked about his nonprofit project. I can't imagine building a life without you, he'd said, holding out a ring that featured a small diamond surrounded by tiny emeralds arranged in a pattern that looked like circuit board traces. Will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life being amazed by how much you notice? Marina had said yes before he'd finished the question. Their wedding had been small but perfect, held in Alex's grandmother's backyard with ceremony decorations that incorporated string lights arranged to look like network diagrams. Marina's parents had flown in from Chicago, where they'd moved after retiring from their jobs at a medical device company. Alex's grandmother had insisted on making traditional Romanian cabbage rolls after learning they were Marina's favorite childhood comfort food. You two are gonna change the world, Alex's grandmother had whispered to Marina during their first dance. I can see it in how you look at each other and how you talk about your work. Just remember that changing the world is hard work, and you'll need to protect what you've built together. For the first 5 years of their marriage, they'd done exactly that. Vertex Security Solutions had grown from a two-person operation into a respected consulting firm with 8 employees and clients throughout Texas. Marina's forensic work had been featured in several industry publications, and Alex's security systems had been licensed by companies nationwide. They'd bought a house in a quiet neighborhood in South Austin with a large office space where they could work together and a screened-in back porch where they'd sit in the evenings sharing wine and stories about their day. Marina had converted the spare bedroom into a home laboratory where she could analyze sensitive evidence without having to rely on external facilities. They'd talked about having children, but agreed to wait until the business was more established. I want to be able to give our kids the same kind of attention and support your grandmother gave you. That means building something stable first. The cracks in their partnership had started small, almost imperceptible changes that Marina had initially attributed to the natural evolution of a growing business. Alex had begun taking more solo meetings with potential clients, explaining that some executives preferred dealing with a single point of contact. He'd started traveling more frequently for conferences and business development opportunities, often to cities where Marina had connections who could have facilitated joint meetings. You don't need to come to every single networking event, Alex had said when Marina had expressed interest in attending a cybersecurity conference in San Antonio. Your time is better spent on the forensic work that's really driving our revenue. I can handle the relationship building. Marina had accepted this logic because it made sense on the surface. Her forensic investigations did generate significant revenue, and Alex had always been more naturally outgoing in social situations. But looking back, she realized that this had been the beginning of their professional lives diverging in ways that had created space for secrets. The changes in Alex's behavior had accelerated gradually. Business trips that used to be planned weeks in advance began happening with shorter notice. Emergency client meeting, he'd explain, throwing clothes into his overlight bag with practiced efficiency. New security breach at that retail chain I've been working with. They need immediate consultation. Marina had offered to help with several of these emergency situations, pointing out that her forensic expertise could be valuable in understanding the scope of breaches, but Alex had consistently declined her assistance. This client is very particular about limiting their exposure, he'd say. The fewer people who know the details, the better. Conference calls that used to happen in their shared office had moved to Alex's private study. Confidentiality issues, he'd explained when Marina had asked about the change. Some clients are nervous about discussing sensitive information if they think other people might overhear. Marina had understood the need for confidentiality in their line of work, but she'd begun feeling excluded from major decisions about their company's direction.
Alex would return from business trips with signed contracts for projects she'd never heard discussed, working with clients whose names didn't appear in their shared business development pipeline. When did we start operating separate business development tracks? Marina had asked during one of their increasingly rare strategy meetings. We're not operating separate tracks, Alex had replied, but his answer had felt rehearsed. I'm just being more strategic about which opportunities I bring to your attention. You are getting overwhelmed trying to balance forensic work with business development, so I'm filtering out the prospects that aren't a good fit for your expertise. This had been partially true. Marina's forensic work did require intense focus and long hours, and she had sometimes felt frustrated by interruptions from potential clients whose needs didn't align with her specialized skills. But Alex's filtering had apparently included opportunities that would have been perfect for her expertise, and she'd only learned about them when she'd encountered other consultants at industry events who'd mentioned projects they'd thought Vertex would be bidding on. The most troubling change had been Alex's reaction to Marina's natural curiosity about his work. She'd always been someone who asked detailed questions about everything, a trait that made her excellent at forensic investigation, but sometimes annoying in casual conversation. Alex had initially found her thoroughness endearing, often joking that she could extract information from reluctant witnesses better than any interrogator. But over the past 2 years, her questions about his business activities had started generating defensive responses that felt completely out of proportion to her inquiries.
When she'd asked about the details of a security system he designed for a chain of medical clinics, Alex had accused her of micromanaging his work. When she'd noticed that his travel expenses seemed high for the relatively short trips he was taking, he'd suggested that she was trying to control him. "Marina, you're developing a really unhealthy need to monitor everything I do," Alex had said during an argument about his travel schedule. "I'm your husband and business partner, not a suspect in one of your investigations. This constant questioning is making me feel like I can't do my job without being interrogated." The conversation had escalated into their worst fight in years, with Alex ultimately storming out of the house and staying at a hotel overnight. When he'd returned the next morning, he'd apologized for his harsh words, but had maintained that Marina's questions were becoming excessive and controlling. "I love that you're detail-oriented, but you need to trust me to handle my responsibilities without constant oversight," he'd said. "Can we agree that I'll keep you informed about major developments without having to account for every single meeting and phone call?" Marina had agreed because she'd wanted to preserve their relationship, and because Alex's accusation had made her question whether she was being unreasonably suspicious. She'd made a conscious effort to ask fewer questions about his work and to focus on her own projects rather than trying to maintain awareness of every aspect of their shared business. This decision had created exactly the space Alex had apparently needed to build an entirely separate life. The birthday card incident had happened on a Thursday morning in October. Alex had left early for what he'd described as a breakfast meeting with a potential client in downtown Austin, and Marina had decided to straighten his office as a small gesture of care. His desk was perpetually covered with papers, coffee cups, and electronic devices in various stages of charging, and she'd thought organizing it might help him be more productive. The card had been wedged behind his monitor, probably dislodged from wherever he'd been hiding it when he'd moved the screen to access cable connections. Emma's cheerful drawing and carefully written message had hit Marina like a physical blow, forcing her to sit down heavily in Alex's desk chair as the implications sank in. Someone named Emma considered Alex her daddy. Emma was 6 years old, which meant she'd been born around the time Alex had started traveling more frequently and become more secretive about his work. The card was addressed to Maplewood Elementary School in San Antonio, where Alex claimed to have several important clients that required regular on-site visits. Marina's forensic training had immediately kicked in, cataloging additional evidence she'd previously overlooked. Alex's laptop bag, which used to stay in their shared office, had migrated to his private study and was no longer accessible to her. His phone, which had once been casually left on counters and tables, was now constantly in his possession and protected by a password she didn't know. His laundry had begun including children's stickers and mysterious stains that suggested contact with small hands and art supplies. Most troubling of all, his travel patterns had become remarkably consistent. Every other weekend, Alex would have a client emergency or networking opportunity that required him to drive to San Antonio on Friday evening and return Sunday night. These trips had been happening for nearly 3 years, with clockwork regularity that suggested routine rather than business necessity. Marina had spent the rest of that Thursday feeling like she was living in someone else's life. Every familiar object in their house had taken on a sinister quality, as if Alex's deception had infected their shared space with uncertainty. The coffee maker they'd bought together for their 3rd anniversary suddenly seemed like evidence of a facade. The family photos displayed throughout their home felt like props in an elaborate performance. When Alex had returned home that evening, Marina had hidden the birthday card in her own office and attempted to behave normally while studying his face for signs of deception she might have missed for years. He'd seemed tired but cheerful, asking about her day and sharing amusing anecdotes from his client meeting with the same casual intimacy that had characterized their relationship for 8 years. "How was the downtown meeting?" Marina had asked, testing whether he'd stick to his cover story. "Productive but exhausting. New client with a complex network architecture. It's going to require several follow-up meetings to fully understand their security needs." He delivered this lie with perfect sincerity, maintaining eye contact and displaying none of the behavioral tells that Marina had been trained to recognize in deceptive subjects. This realization had been almost as devastating as finding the birthday card. Alex wasn't just living a double life, he was sophisticated enough to deceive someone whose profession involved detecting deception. Friday had passed in a haze of forced normalcy, with Marina struggling to concentrate on her forensic work, while Alex moved through her home with the casual confidence of someone who believed his secrets were secure. He'd mentioned during dinner that he'd probably need to make a quick trip to San Antonio over the weekend to follow up on some potential business developments. Another emergency client situation? Marina had asked, keeping her tone neutral, despite the adrenaline spike caused by watching him lying directly to her face. Not exactly an emergency, but they're making a decision between several consulting firms on Monday, and face-to-face contact could make the difference. Alex had explained, "I'll probably drive down Saturday morning and come back Sunday evening." Marina had nodded and expressed appropriate support for his business development efforts, while internally marveling at the elaborate fictional framework he'd constructed to justify his regular visits to his second family. Every element of his story contained just enough plausible detail to deflect further questions while providing no verifiable information that could expose the truth.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
That night, as Alex had slept peacefully beside her, Marina had stared at the ceiling and tried to calculate how long this deception had been occurring. The birthday card suggested Emma was 6 years old, but children often weren't precise about dates when making cards for parents. Emma could have been born any time in the past 6 or 7 years, which meant Alex's relationship with her mother could have started during the early years of his marriage to Marina. The thought that Alex might have been building a second family while she'd been working 18-hour days to establish their business made Marina feel physically sick. All those late nights she'd spent analyzing cyber attack patterns while Alex had claimed to be at networking events might have actually been spent with another woman and child who believed they were his primary family. Saturday morning, Alex had followed his usual routine for San Antonio trips, packing his overnight bag with practiced efficiency and leaving the house by 8 a.m. after kissing Marina goodbye and promising to call when he arrived safely. For the first time in their relationship, Marina had watched him drive away while planning to investigate rather than trust. She'd waited 30 minutes to ensure Alex was committed to his journey before beginning what would become the most important forensic investigation of her career. Her own husband had become the subject, and the evidence was hidden in digital devices and online accounts that she'd previously respected as private. Marina's professional approach to digital investigations had always emphasized systematic methodology and comprehensive documentation. She'd applied the same standards to examining Alex's deception, beginning with the physical evidence available in their shared home and gradually expanding to digital forensics that would reveal the full scope of his double life. The first search had focused on Alex's private study, which she'd rarely entered since he'd claimed it as his exclusive workspace 2 years earlier. Behind the closed door, Marina had discovered a space that felt like a completely different person's office. Gone were the casual family photos and shared mementos that had characterized his previous work areas. The walls were decorated with generic motivational posters and certificates from professional organizations, creating an environment that felt sterile and impersonal. Alex's filing cabinet had been locked, but Marina's cybersecurity background had included physical security training that made quick work of the simple mechanism. Inside, she'd found folders organized with meticulous care, containing documents related to business activities she'd never heard him discuss, client contracts with companies in San Antonio that weren't listed in their shared business records, travel receipts for hotels and restaurants that suggested extended stays rather than day trips. Most revealing of all, insurance documents for a second vehicle registered in Alex's name that Marina hadn't known existed. The vehicle registration had been dated 3 years earlier, around the time Alex had begun traveling more frequently. The address listed wasn't their Austin home, but rather a location in San Antonio that Marina had immediately recognized as being near Maplewood Elementary School. Alex had essentially established a second residence that allowed him to maintain the fiction of business travel while actually commuting between two families. Marina had photographed every document with her phone, creating a comprehensive record that would be essential for the confrontation she was planning. But the physical evidence had only provided the framework of Alex's deception. The emotional details of his second life were hidden in digital spaces that would require more sophisticated investigation techniques. Alex's personal laptop had been password protected, but Marina's expertise in digital forensics had included methods for accessing secured devices. The process had taken several hours and required specialized software that she'd installed on her own computer,
But eventually, she'd gained access to files and browser history that revealed the stunning scope of Alex's elaborate deception. The browser history had told a story of systematic planning that spanned nearly 4 years. Regular searches for family-friendly restaurants in San Antonio, online shopping for children's toys and clothing, real estate websites showing apartments and houses in neighborhoods with highly rated elementary schools. Alex hadn't stumbled into his second family, he deliberately constructed it with the same methodical approach he applied to designing security systems. Email accounts that Marina had never known existed contained correspondence with someone named Sarah Chen, a woman who clearly believed she was in an exclusive relationship with Alex. The messages dated back almost 4 years and chronicled the development of their relationship, Sarah's pregnancy, and the birth of their daughter Emma. Sarah's emails had painted a picture of a man who was attentive, loving, and completely committed to their family. She'd written about how grateful she was that Alex had proposed to her shortly after Emma's birth, how much she appreciated his dedication to providing for them, and how excited she was about their upcoming wedding plans. Marina had stared at the screen in complete shock. Not only was Alex maintaining a second family, but he was apparently engaged to marry Emma's mother while still married to Marina. This level of deception suggested a degree of compartmentalization that bordered on pathological. The financial evidence had been equally devastating. Alex had been systematically diverting money from their shared business accounts to support his San Antonio family. Automatic transfers to savings accounts Marina had never seen, credit cards used exclusively for purchases in San Antonio, even a separate business entity that appeared to be generating revenue from clients Marina had never heard of. Alex had essentially been running 2 parallel lives with the same efficiency he'd once applied to their shared goals. He'd maintained their Austin home and marriage as his primary identity while building an equally substantial life in San Antonio with Sarah and Emma. The logistics alone would have required extraordinary planning and energy. Marina had spent most of Saturday afternoon documenting Alex's deception, creating a comprehensive file that included financial records, correspondence, photographs, and timelines. Her forensic training had taught her to be thorough and objective, but working on evidence of her own husband's betrayal had required a level of emotional detachment that felt almost surreal. By evening, she'd assembled a case file that revealed not just Alex's infidelity, but fraud, bigamy, and systematic theft from their shared business. The man she'd loved and trusted for 8 years had been conducting what would amount to a long-term criminal enterprise, using her own money to fund a second family that existed in complete ignorance of her existence. Alex had called Saturday evening to report that his client meetings were going well and that he'd probably be returning Sunday evening as planned. Marina had listened to his familiar voice sharing fictional updates about fictional business activities while looking at photographs of him playing with Emma at a San Antonio park. The contrast between his loving behavior toward his daughter and his casual cruelty toward his wife had been almost incomprehensible. "How are things going with the new client?" Marina had asked, testing whether his fictional narrative remained consistent. "Really positive response to the preliminary security assessment. They're dealing with some complex compliance issues that are right in my wheelhouse. I think we have a good chance of landing a significant ongoing contract." Every word had been a lie delivered with perfect sincerity by someone who'd had years of practice deceiving the person who knew him best. Marina had ended the call feeling like she'd been talking to a complete stranger who happened to share her husband's voice.
Sunday had been the longest day of Marina's life. She'd known Alex would return that evening expecting to resume their normal routine, unaware that his entire deception had been exposed. She'd used the time to consult with a divorce attorney, transfer half of their shared assets to accounts Alex couldn't access, and prepare for a confrontation that would end their marriage and probably destroy the business they'd built together. The attorney had been particularly concerned about the criminal implications of Alex's behavior. Bigamy was a felony in Texas, and his systematic diversion of business funds constituted embezzlement. Marina would need to decide whether to pursue criminal charges in addition to divorce proceedings. "Your documentation is extremely thorough," the attorney had said, reviewing Marina's file. "This level of evidence makes it highly likely that you'll be able to recover most of your shared assets and potentially seek compensation for the funds he diverted. The question is whether you want to send him to prison or simply want him out of your life."
Marina had realized she wasn't sure what she wanted beyond the truth being acknowledged and her own life being returned to her control. The desire for revenge felt less important than the need to understand how someone she'd loved so completely had been capable of such sustained deception. Alex had returned home Sunday evening at his usual time, carrying his overnight bag and a small gift bag that he'd presented to Marina with apparent thoughtfulness. "Saw this at a little shop in San Antonio and thought you'd like it," he'd said, handing her a delicate silver bracelet with a charm that looked like a computer circuit. The gesture had felt like the cruelest mockery of their shared history. Alex had probably bought the bracelet while shopping with Sarah and Emma, selecting something that would maintain his facade of being a caring husband while actually being a reminder of the life he'd stolen from Marina to build something else. "It's beautiful," Marina had said, accepting the gift while looking at Alex's face and wondering if she'd ever actually known the person behind his familiar features. "How did the client meetings go?" "Really well. I think we're going to land that contract I mentioned," Alex had replied, settling into their familiar evening routine with apparent contentment. "How was your weekend? Get much work done?" "Actually, I spent most of it conducting a forensic investigation," Marina had said, watching carefully for any change in Alex's expression. "Interesting case?" he'd asked, showing no sign of concern about her choice of weekend activities. "Very interesting. Lots of digital evidence pointing to systematic fraud and deception, the kind of case where someone thinks they're being clever, but they're actually leaving evidence everywhere." Alex had nodded with apparent interest while pulling off his shoes and sorting through the mail that had accumulated during his absence. His complete lack of concern about Marina's investigation had been almost more disturbing than his lies. He'd been so confident in his deception that he felt no need to worry about his forensic expert wife conducting investigations. "Sounds like whoever you're investigating made some rookie mistakes," Alex had said with a chuckle. "Amazing how many people think they can hide digital activity without understanding how much evidence they're actually creating." "It really is amazing," Marina had agreed. In this case, the subject had email accounts, financial records, travel patterns, and even physical evidence that completely contradicted his cover story. The kind of comprehensive case file that makes prosecution almost inevitable. Alex had continued his normal evening routine, preparing dinner and sharing anecdotes from his fictional business trip, while Marina had watched him with growing fascination. She'd been talking directly about his crimes, and he'd been so confident in his ability to deceive her that he'd felt comfortable discussing the incompetence of people who left digital evidence of their deceptions. The confrontation had finally happened Monday morning after Alex had left for what he'd claimed was a follow-up meeting with his San Antonio client. Marina had used his absence to arrange the evidence throughout their living room, creating a comprehensive display that would make denial impossible. When Alex had returned home that evening, he'd found Marina sitting calmly on their couch, surrounded by printouts of his emails with Sarah, photographs of him with Emma, financial records showing his diversion of business funds, and copies of legal documents related to his second residence and vehicle registration. "Hello, Alex," Marina had said, as he'd frozen in their doorway, his face cycling through expressions of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. "How was your meeting with Sarah today?" Alex had stood silent for a long moment, staring at the evidence of his exposed deception, before slowly setting down his briefcase and walking into their living room. He'd settled into the chair across from Marina with the careful movements of someone who'd realized that his entire world was about to change. "How long have you known?" he'd asked quietly. "Since Thursday, when I found Emma's birthday card behind your computer monitor. But I've been documenting everything systematically since then. Your operational security was actually quite poor for someone in our profession." Alex had looked around at the comprehensive evidence Marina had assembled, his expression shifting from resignation to something that might have been admiration. "You investigated me like a criminal case." "Because it is a criminal case. Bigamy, embezzlement, fraud. You've been running a long-term criminal enterprise, using our shared resources to support a second family." Marina had kept her voice level and professional, treating Alex like any other subject of investigation. "The question is, what we're going to do about it." "What do you want to do about it?"
Alex had asked, and for the first time since their relationship had begun, Marina had seen genuine fear in his eyes. Marina had realized that what she wanted most was simply for the truth to be acknowledged. For 8 years, Alex had made her feel paranoid and controlling for asking questions about obvious inconsistencies in his behavior. He'd gaslit her into believing that her natural investigative instincts were toxic to their relationship. The vindication of being completely right about her suspicions felt more important than any revenge she might pursue.
I want you to admit that every time you accused me of not trusting you, you were lying to my face, Marina had said. I want you to acknowledge that my instincts were correct and that you've been systematically stealing from our business to fund a life with another woman and child. Alex had nodded slowly, his usual confidence completely absent. You're right about everything. I've been lying to you for years, and you had every reason to be suspicious. Your instincts were always right. Why? Marina had asked, and for the first time in their conversation, her professional composure had cracked slightly. Why build a second family instead of just leaving me? Why steal money instead of asking for a business partnership dissolution? Why lie for years instead of just telling the truth? Alex had been quiet for so long that Marina had wondered if he was going to answer at all. When he'd finally spoken, his voice had carried a vulnerability she hadn't heard since their early days together. Because I wanted both lives, he said simply. I wanted the stability and professional partnership we'd built together, and I wanted the fresh start and family experience I had with Sarah and Emma. I convinced myself I could maintain both without anyone getting hurt. Except that everyone got hurt, Marina had pointed out. I've been married to someone who didn't exist. Sarah thinks she's engaged to someone who's already married. Emma loves a father who's living a lie. You've damaged 3 people's lives to avoid making difficult decisions. I know, Alex had said quietly. I know I've destroyed everything good in my life, and I know I don't deserve forgiveness from any of you. Marina had looked at this man she'd loved for 8 years and realized that she felt more sadness than anger. Alex had had everything most people dreamed of: a successful business, a loving marriage, financial security, and professional recognition. And he'd thrown it all away because he'd been too selfish and cowardly to appreciate what he had. What's going to happen now? Alex had asked. You're going to pack your things and leave tonight. Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce and dissolving our business partnership. The attorneys will handle dividing our assets, and you'll need to figure out how to explain to Sarah that you're already married. Are you going to press criminal charges? Marina had considered this question carefully. Part of her wanted Alex to face the full legal consequences of his actions, but another part simply wanted him out of her life completely. That depends on how cooperative you are with the divorce proceedings and asset division. If you try to hide money or make this process difficult, I'll turn everything over to the district attorney. Alex had nodded and stood up slowly, looking around their living room like he was seeing it for the last time. For what it's worth, I never meant for this to happen. I never planned to hurt you. But you did plan it. For years. Every lie was a choice. Every stolen dollar was a decision. Every weekend with your other family was a deliberate betrayal. The fact that you didn't intend to hurt me doesn't change the fact that you systematically chose to deceive me for your own benefit. Alex had packed his belongings and left that night, and Marina had never seen him again. The divorce proceedings had been swift and decisive, with Alex agreeing to all of Marina's terms rather than risking criminal prosecution. The business had been dissolved, with Marina retaining the client relationships and intellectual property she'd developed, while Alex had kept the physical assets and equipment. 6 months later, Marina had learned through mutual acquaintances that Alex's relationship with Sarah had ended when she discovered his marriage to Marina. Emma had lost the father she'd known for 6 years, and Sarah had faced the devastating realization that her entire relationship had been built on lies. They'd all trusted him completely, and they'd all discovered that trust had been misplaced in the most painful way possible.
The divorce had been finalized on a Tuesday morning in spring, and Marina had walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than she had in years. The woman who had been made to feel paranoid and controlling for asking reasonable questions about her husband's behavior had been completely vindicated. Her investigative instincts, her attention to detail, and her refusal to ignore obvious inconsistencies had all been proven correct. Marina had rebuilt her consulting practice as a solo operation, specializing in the kind of comprehensive digital forensics that had exposed Alex's deception. Her reputation for thoroughness and accuracy had attracted clients throughout Texas, and her business had grown beyond what she and Alex had achieved together. The new office she'd rented was bright and modern, with state-of-the-art equipment and a view of downtown Austin that reminded her daily of how far she'd come from the days when she'd worked from their apartment bedroom. The walls were decorated with her professional certifications, awards from industry organizations, and photographs from conferences where she'd been invited to speak about digital forensics techniques. Marina had never remarried, but she'd built a life that felt authentic and fulfilling in ways her marriage never had. She'd developed friendships with colleagues who valued her expertise, pursued hobbies that had been neglected during her years of supporting Alex's career, and created a home environment that reflected her own taste rather than compromises with someone else's preferences. The trust issues that Alex's deception had created required therapy and time to heal, but Marina eventually realized that her ability to detect deception and uncover hidden information was actually a strength rather than a character flaw. The skills that made her feel paranoid in her marriage were exactly the skills that made her exceptional at her profession. 2 years after the divorce, Marina received a letter from Emma, now 8 years old and apparently learning to process the complex emotions surrounding her father's disappearance from her life. The letter was simple and heartbreaking, thanking Marina for helping her understand why her daddy had stopped visiting and asking if Marina thought her daddy really loved her.
Marina had written back carefully, explaining that adults sometimes made poor choices that hurt the people they loved, and that Alex's mistakes didn't reflect anything Emma had done wrong. She'd emphasized that being a loving father to Emma and being a dishonest husband to Marina were separate issues, and that Emma deserved to remember the good experiences she'd had with her father. The correspondence with Emma had continued sporadically, and Marina had found herself serving as an unexpected source of stability for a child whose world had been shattered by the same deception that had destroyed Marina's marriage. It had been a strange form of healing, helping Emma process emotions that mirrored Marina's own experience of betrayal and abandonment. Standing in her new office on a Friday afternoon, 3 years after finding Emma's birthday card, Marina had reflected on how completely her life had changed. The woman who'd once felt guilty for questioning her husband's obvious lies was now one of the most respected digital forensics experts in Texas. The marriage that had made her feel paranoid and controlling had been replaced by professional relationships built on mutual respect and shared expertise. Alex had lost everything: his marriage, his business, his second family, and his professional reputation. The man who'd accused Marina of not trusting him had proven that he'd never deserved her trust in the first place. Emma's second family had trusted him completely, and that trust had been just as misplaced as Marina's had been. Marina had learned that trust without verification was simply naivety, and that healthy relationships required the ability to ask questions without being made to feel suspicious or controlling. The skills that had made her marriage feel toxic were exactly the skills that had saved her from wasting more years on someone who'd been systematically deceiving her. The phone call from a potential new client interrupted Marina's reflection, bringing her attention back to the present and the challenging forensic case that would occupy her weekend. As she'd listened to the client describe their complex security breach, Marina had felt the familiar excitement of a puzzle that would require all of her analytical skills to solve. "I'll need complete access to your systems and full cooperation from your staff," Marina had told the client. "My approach is very thorough, and I tend to notice things that other investigators miss. Some people find my level of scrutiny uncomfortable." "That's exactly what we need," the client had replied. "We want someone who won't accept surface explanations and will dig until they find the truth, no matter how unpleasant it might be." Marina had smiled as she'd scheduled the initial consultation. Her reputation for relentless investigation and attention to detail was exactly what made her valuable to clients who needed the truth rather than comfortable fiction. The same qualities that Alex had found threatening were the foundation of her professional success. The woman who'd been made to feel ashamed of her natural suspicion and investigative instincts had built a career based on those exact qualities. Clients paid her specifically because she didn't trust surface explanations and insisted on comprehensive evidence before reaching conclusions. The traits that had made her marriage feel toxic were exactly what made her exceptional at protecting others from deception and fraud. As Marina had prepared to leave her office that Friday evening, she'd realized that Alex's betrayal had ultimately taught her the most valuable lesson of her professional life. Trust was something that should be earned through consistent behavior over time, not demanded as a right or enforced through accusations of paranoia. The people who demanded trust without earning it were usually the ones who deserved it least, and the people who made others feel guilty for asking reasonable questions were typically the ones with the most to hide. Marina's instincts had been correct about Alex from the beginning, and learning to trust those instincts again had been the key to rebuilding her life. Emma's second family had trusted Alex completely, just as Marina had in the early years of their marriage. But trust without verification had left all of them vulnerable to someone who'd been systematically deceiving everyone who cared about him. The lesson wasn't to avoid trusting people, but to ensure that trust was based on evidence rather than hope. Marina had locked her office and walked toward her car, thinking about the weekend ahead and the new case that would challenge her skills. She'd built a life based on truth and evidence, surrounded by people who valued her expertise rather than resenting her questions. The woman Alex had tried to diminish had become stronger and more successful than he'd ever been. His second family had trusted him, but that trust had been misplaced just as much as Marina's had been. The difference was that Marina had eventually learned to trust her own instincts instead of someone else's assurances. That lesson had saved her career, her self-respect, and ultimately her life. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning in Marina's downtown Austin office, buried among routine client inquiries and vendor communications. The subject line read, "Urgent consultation needed, marital fraud investigation," and the sender was listed as Catherine Walsh from Westlake Hills, one of Austin's most affluent neighborhoods. Marina opened the message while sipping her second cup of coffee, expecting another standard case of suspected corporate embezzlement or digital harassment. Instead, she found herself reading a story that felt uncomfortably familiar. "Ms. Voss, I hope you can help me. My name is Catherine Walsh, and I believe my husband has been living a double life for several years. I found evidence that suggests he may be maintaining a second family in Houston while continuing our marriage here in Austin. I've heard about your expertise in digital forensics and your reputation for uncovering complex deception cases. I'm desperate for answers and don't know where else to turn." Marina set down her coffee cup and read the email again, feeling the familiar tightness in her chest that accompanied memories of her own discovery process. 3 years had passed since she'd found Emma's birthday card, but certain triggers could still transport her back to that moment of devastating realization. She'd built a successful practice specializing in corporate digital forensics, but occasionally she accepted cases involving personal investigations when they aligned with her expertise. Something about Catherine's message suggested this wouldn't be a simple matrimonial dispute, but rather a complex case requiring the kind of systematic analysis that had become Marina's signature approach. Marina replied within an hour, suggesting they meet that afternoon at her office to discuss the situation in detail. She'd learned to trust her instincts about potential clients, and Catherine's straightforward description of her suspicions suggested someone who was serious about uncovering the truth rather than simply seeking validation for unfounded jealousy. Catherine Walsh arrived at Marina's office precisely on time, demonstrating the kind of punctuality that suggested military or corporate background. She was an elegant woman in her early 40s, dressed in a tailored business suit that conveyed both professionalism and understated wealth. Her handshake was firm, her eye contact direct, and her demeanor suggested someone accustomed to handling difficult situations with composure. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Catherine said as she settled into the chair across from Marina's desk. "I wasn't sure if you handled this type of case, but your background in digital forensics seemed perfect for what I'm dealing with." Marina had prepared her standard intake questionnaire for matrimonial investigations, but she'd also done preliminary research on Catherine Walsh that revealed an impressive professional background.
Catherine was a senior partner at one of Austin's most prestigious law firms, specializing in corporate litigation. She'd graduated from Harvard Law School, served as a federal prosecutor for 5 years, and built a reputation for methodical case preparation and courtroom effectiveness.
I handle various types of investigations, but I specialize in cases that require comprehensive digital analysis, Marina explained. Why don't you start by telling me what led you to suspect your husband might be deceiving you? Catherine opened a leather portfolio and extracted a small stack of documents that she arranged on Marina's desk with practiced precision. My husband David is a pharmaceutical sales representative who travels extensively throughout Texas. For the past 4 years, his travel patterns have become increasingly predictable. Every other weekend, he has business in Houston that requires him to stay overnight. These trips happen with clockwork regularity, regardless of what else is happening in our personal or professional lives. Marina recognized the pattern immediately. Consistent travel schedules that didn't fluctuate based on business needs were often indicators of personal rather than professional obligations. Has he provided specific information about these Houston clients? That's where things become interesting, Catherine replied, pulling out additional documents. David works for Meridian Pharmaceuticals, and I decided to verify his travel claims by contacting their human resources department. I have connections there through my legal work with medical device companies. Catherine handed Marina a printout of an email exchange with Meridian's HR director. According to his employment records, David's territory covers central Texas but excludes the Houston metropolitan area. He hasn't had any official business assignments in Houston for the past 3 years. Marina studied the employment verification documents, noting the discrepancy between David's claimed travel schedule and his actual work responsibilities. So he's been lying about the professional purpose of these trips for at least 3 years. Did you confront him with this information? Not directly. I'm a litigator, so I understand the importance of building a comprehensive case before making accusations. I've been documenting his behavior patterns for the past 2 months, and the evidence suggests a level of deception that goes far beyond simple infidelity. Catherine opened a second folder containing what appeared to be financial analysis that impressed Marina with its thoroughness. I've been tracking our joint credit card statements and bank records. David has been making regular purchases in Houston that suggest domestic activity rather than business travel: grocery stores, children's clothing retailers, toy stores, and educational supply companies. The financial patterns were remarkably similar to what Marina had discovered in her own investigation of Alex's deception. Someone maintaining a second household would inevitably create digital footprints through routine purchases and bill payments. Have you found evidence of a second residence or vehicle registration? That's where I need your expertise, Catherine admitted. I found records of automatic payments for utilities and insurance that don't correspond to our Austin home, but I haven't been able to trace them to specific addresses or accounts. David has become very secretive about his personal devices and financial information. Marina appreciated Catherine's methodical approach to gathering evidence. Most clients arrived with emotional suspicions but little systematic documentation. Catherine had approached her marital problems with the same analytical rigor she'd probably apply to complex corporate litigation. What made you initially suspicious of his Houston trips? Marina asked. 4 years is a long time to maintain regular deception without raising obvious red flags. Catherine's composed demeanor flickered slightly, revealing the emotional toll of her investigation. 2 months ago, I found a child's drawing in David's car. It was wedged under the passenger seat, probably dropped and forgotten. The drawing showed a family of 3 with the words, "I love you, Daddy," written in crayon. Marina felt the familiar chill of recognition. Children's artwork had exposed both her own husband's deception and now Catherine's. There was something particularly cruel about discovering betrayal through the innocent expressions of children who believed they were loved by fathers living lies. The drawing was signed by someone named Lucas, age 7, Catherine continued. David and I don't have children. We've been trying for years, actually, which makes this discovery especially painful. The additional context made David's deception even more devastating. While Catherine had been struggling with infertility and hoping to start a family with her husband, he'd apparently been raising a child with another woman. The emotional complexity of the situation required sensitivity that went beyond standard investigative procedures.
I'm sorry you're going through this, Marina said, meaning it sincerely. These cases are emotionally difficult even when you approach them professionally. Are you prepared for the possibility that your suspicions might be confirmed? Catherine nodded with the kind of resignation that suggested she'd already processed the likely outcomes. I need to know the truth, regardless of how painful it might be. I can't continue living with someone I don't know, and I can't make informed decisions about my future without understanding the scope of David's deception. Marina spent the next hour explaining her investigation methodology and discussing the legal implications of the evidence they might uncover. Catherine's legal background made her an ideal client for this type of complex case, since she understood both the procedural requirements for gathering admissible evidence and the potential criminal ramifications of systematic deception. My approach is comprehensive but discreet, Marina explained. I'll analyze David's digital footprints, financial records, travel patterns, and communication history to build a complete picture of his activities. The process typically takes 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the complexity of the deception.
Catherine agreed to Marina's terms and provided access to shared financial accounts and household devices that would serve as starting points for the investigation. As Catherine prepared to leave, she paused at Marina's office door with a question that revealed her own investigative instincts. Have you handled cases like this before? You seem very familiar with the patterns of behavior I've described. Marina considered how much personal information to share with a client. Her own experience with marital deception provided valuable insights for similar cases, but professional boundaries required careful navigation of personal disclosure. I have experience with cases involving systematic deception and financial fraud, Marina replied diplomatically. The patterns you've identified are consistent with what I've seen in other investigations. Your methodical approach to documentation will be very helpful for building a comprehensive case. Catherine nodded and left Marina's office with the controlled composure of someone who'd already begun emotionally preparing for difficult revelations. Marina watched through her window as Catherine walked toward the parking garage, recognizing the determined stride of a woman who decided to pursue truth regardless of personal cost. That evening, Marina began her preliminary analysis of David Walsh's digital footprints using the access credentials Catherine had provided. The shared laptop contained browser history that immediately confirmed Catherine's suspicions about the scope of David's deception. Regular searches for Houston-area restaurants, entertainment venues, and family-friendly activities suggested someone maintaining an active social life in that city. Online shopping patterns included purchases of men's clothing shipped to Houston addresses, children's toys and books, and household items that indicated domestic responsibilities rather than business travel. Most revealing were the social media accounts that David had apparently forgotten to secure. His Facebook profile, accessible through saved login credentials on the shared laptop, contained photos and check-ins that told the story Catherine had suspected. David appeared in numerous images with a woman named Jennifer Martinez and a young boy who was clearly the Lucas responsible for the drawing Catherine had found. The photos spanned nearly 4 years and chronicled what appeared to be a loving family relationship. David and Jennifer at Houston-area restaurants, celebrating birthdays and holidays, David teaching Lucas to ride a bicycle in what looked like the backyard of a suburban home. The three of them at local attractions like the Houston Zoo and Space Center, creating memories that paralleled the family life David should have been building with Catherine. Marina documented each image with timestamps and location data, building a comprehensive timeline that would prove invaluable for legal proceedings. The social media evidence alone would be sufficient to confirm David's deception, but Marina's thoroughness required deeper investigation into the financial and logistical aspects of his double life. The banking records Catherine had provided revealed a sophisticated system of financial management that impressed Marina with its complexity. David had been systematically diverting money from their joint accounts to fund his Houston family while maintaining the appearance of normal household expenses in Austin. Automatic transfers to savings accounts that Catherine didn't know existed, credit cards used exclusively for Houston purchases but paid from accounts that appeared to be business-related. Even a separate business entity that generated income from pharmaceutical consulting work that David hadn't disclosed to his primary employer. Marina cross-referenced the financial data with David's travel schedule and found perfect correlation between his claimed business trips and his actual family visits to Houston. Every other weekend for 4 years, David had been commuting between his two families with the precision of someone managing a complex logistical operation.
The investigation took on additional complexity when Marina discovered that David had been representing himself as divorced to Jennifer and her family. Social media posts and public records suggested that Jennifer believed she was in a relationship with a single father who'd gained custody of Lucas after a difficult divorce from an unnamed ex-wife. David had apparently constructed elaborate fictional narratives for both families, presenting himself to Catherine as a dedicated husband dealing with demanding business travel, while telling Jennifer that he was a devoted father rebuilding his life after marital failure. The psychological sophistication required to maintain such complex deceptions suggested a level of calculation that bordered on pathological. Marina's digital forensics revealed evidence that David had been planning to formalize his relationship with Jennifer through marriage while remaining legally married to Catherine. Email exchanges with wedding venues and discussions of future plans indicated that David intended to commit bigamy rather than choose between his two families. The criminal implications of David's behavior extended beyond simple adultery to include fraud, bigamy, and potentially identity theft related to his use of false information in establishing his Houston identity. Marina documented everything with the precision required for potential criminal prosecution while maintaining focus on Catherine's immediate need for truth and closure. 3 weeks after beginning the investigation, Marina had assembled a comprehensive case file that revealed the stunning scope of David's deception. He'd been living a complete double life for 4 years, maintaining separate households, relationships, and financial obligations while systematically lying to everyone involved. Marina scheduled a meeting with Catherine to present her findings, knowing that the evidence would be devastating but necessary for Catherine's ability to make informed decisions about her future. The conference room Marina had reserved for sensitive client meetings provided privacy and professional atmosphere appropriate for such difficult conversations. Catherine arrived at the appointed time with the same composed demeanor she'd displayed during their initial consultation, but Marina could detect underlying tension in her posture and facial expressions. 3 weeks of waiting for confirmation of her worst suspicions had clearly taken an emotional toll despite Catherine's professional training in managing stressful situations. "I have comprehensive results from the investigation," Marina began, arranging printed evidence across the conference table in organized categories. "Unfortunately, your suspicions were correct in every detail, and the scope of David's deception extends beyond what you initially described." Marina presented the evidence systematically, beginning with the social media documentation that proved David's relationship with Jennifer and Lucas. Catherine examined each photograph with the clinical detachment of a prosecutor reviewing evidence. But Marina noticed her hands trembling slightly as she processed images of her husband living the family life she desperately wanted with him. 4 years, Catherine said quietly, studying a photo of David pushing Lucas on a swing set. "He's been a father to this child for 4 years, while telling me we needed to keep trying for our own family." The financial evidence was equally devastating. Marina explained how David had been systematically diverting money from their shared resources to fund his Houston household, while maintaining the fiction of business-related expenses. The amounts were substantial enough to constitute felony embezzlement under Texas law. "He's been stealing from us to support them," Catherine observed, reviewing bank statements that showed the pattern of unauthorized transfers. "Every dollar he spent on his second family was money taken from our shared future." The most damaging evidence related to David's apparent plans for bigamous marriage to Jennifer while remaining legally married to Catherine. Email exchanges with wedding planners and discussions of venue reservations indicated that David intended to commit bigamy rather than choose between his two families. The criminal implications of David's behavior extended beyond simple adultery to include fraud, bigamy, and potentially identity theft related to his use of false information in establishing his Houston identity. Marina documented everything with the precision required for potential criminal prosecution while maintaining focus on Catherine's immediate need for truth and closure. 3 weeks after beginning the investigation, Marina had assembled a comprehensive case file that revealed the stunning scope of David's deception. He'd been living a complete double life for 4 years, maintaining separate households, relationships, and financial obligations while systematically lying to everyone involved. Marina scheduled a meeting with Catherine to present her findings, knowing that the evidence would be devastating but necessary for Catherine's ability to make informed decisions about her future. The conference room Marina had reserved for sensitive client meetings provided privacy and professional atmosphere appropriate for such difficult conversations. Catherine arrived at the appointed time with the same composed demeanor she displayed during their initial consultation, but Marina could detect underlying tension in her posture and facial expressions. 3 weeks of waiting for confirmation of her worst suspicions had clearly taken an emotional toll, despite Catherine's professional training in managing stressful situations. "I have comprehensive results from the investigation," Marina began, arranging printed evidence across the conference table in organized categories. "Unfortunately, your suspicions were correct in every detail, and the scope of David's deception extends beyond what you initially described." Marina presented the evidence systematically, beginning with the social media documentation that proved David's relationship with Jennifer and Lucas. Catherine examined each photograph with the clinical detachment of a prosecutor reviewing evidence. But Marina noticed her hands trembling slightly as she processed images of her husband living the family life she desperately wanted with him. "4 years," Catherine said quietly, studying a photo of David pushing Lucas on a swing set. "He's been a father to this child for 4 years, while telling me we needed to keep trying for our own family." The financial evidence was equally devastating. Marina explained how David had been systematically diverting money from their shared resources to fund his Houston household, while maintaining the fiction of business-related expenses. The amounts were substantial enough to constitute felony embezzlement under Texas law. "He's been stealing from us to support them," Catherine observed, reviewing bank statements that showed the pattern of unauthorized transfers. "Every dollar he spent on his second family was money taken from our shared future." The most damaging evidence related to David's apparent plans for bigamous marriage to Jennifer while remaining legally married to Catherine. Email exchanges with wedding planners and discussions of venue reservations indicated that David intended to commit bigamy rather than resolve it through honest disclosure. "He was planning to marry her without divorcing me," Catherine said, her prosecutorial training evident in her immediate grasp of the legal implications. "That's a third-degree felony in Texas, punishable by up to 10 years in prison." Marina had prepared recommendations for Catherine's next steps, including referrals to divorce attorneys who specialize in cases involving fraud and asset concealment. The evidence Marina had gathered would support claims for substantial damages beyond simple divorce settlement, potentially including punitive awards related to David's systematic deception. The social media evidence alone would be sufficient to—
"What about Jennifer and Lucas?" Catherine asked, surprising Marina with her concern for David's other victims. "Did they know about me?" "The evidence suggests Jennifer believes David is divorced and that Lucas thinks of David as his primary father figure," Marina explained. "They're as much victims of his deception as you are. Jennifer has been planning a future with someone who was never actually available for marriage." Catherine spent nearly an hour reviewing the complete evidence file, asking detailed questions about methodology and chain of custody that reflected her legal background. When she'd finished her examination, she sat back in her chair with the expression of someone who'd received confirmation of something she'd already known but hoped wasn't true. "I need to ask about your personal experience with this type of investigation," Catherine said, fixing Marina with direct eye contact. "Your approach to this case has been incredibly thorough, but also emotionally informed in ways that suggest personal familiarity with marital deception." Marina had expected this question and had prepared an answer that balanced professional disclosure with appropriate boundaries. "I've handled similar cases before, and I have personal experience that helps me understand the emotional complexity of discovering systematic deception. That experience makes me more effective at this type of investigation." Catherine nodded with the understanding of someone who recognized evasion but respected the boundaries that made it necessary. "Thank you for being so thorough. This evidence gives me everything I need to move forward with appropriate legal action." Marina provided Catherine with encrypted copies of all evidence and detailed documentation that would meet court standards for admissibility. The investigation had revealed crimes that warranted criminal prosecution in addition to civil divorce proceedings, and Catherine's legal background positioned her to pursue all available remedies. 2 weeks later, Marina received a call from Catherine reporting that David had been arrested on charges of bigamy and embezzlement after attempting to proceed with his planned marriage to Jennifer. The evidence Marina had gathered had been sufficient for criminal prosecutors to file charges immediately upon Catherine's complaint. "Jennifer is devastated," Catherine reported during their brief phone conversation. "She had no idea David was still married and feels completely betrayed.
Lucas is confused about why his father figure has suddenly disappeared from his life. Marina felt sympathy for Jennifer and Lucas, who'd been innocent victims of David's elaborate deception. They'd trusted him completely, just as Catherine had in the early years of their marriage, and that trust had been systematically exploited by someone they'd believed loved them. "What about your divorce proceedings?" Marina asked. Moving forward rapidly, David's criminal charges have eliminated any possibility of contested proceedings, and my attorney expects a settlement that recovers most of the assets he diverted, plus punitive damages for fraud, Catherine explained. "The case you built was so comprehensive that David's attorney recommended complete cooperation rather than fighting charges he couldn't possibly defend against." Marina was pleased that her work had provided Catherine with the evidence needed for both criminal justice and financial recovery. The systematic documentation had served its purpose of revealing truth and providing accountability for systematic deception that had damaged multiple innocent people. 3 months after completing Catherine's investigation, Marina received an unexpected email from Jennifer Martinez, David's former Houston partner. Jennifer had somehow obtained Marina's contact information and was requesting a consultation about her own legal options related to David's deception. Marina agreed to meet with Jennifer, curious about the perspective of someone who'd been deceived in different ways by the same person. Jennifer arrived at Marina's office with 7-year-old Lucas, who waited quietly in the reception area while his mother discussed private matters with Marina. Jennifer was a kindergarten teacher in her early 30s with the patient demeanor and gentle voice that suggested natural affinity for working with young children. Her story of relationship with David differed significantly from Catherine's experience, but involved equally systematic deception about his circumstances and availability. "David told me he was divorced and that his ex-wife had been awarded custody of their children in another state," Jennifer explained. "He said his business travel was related to visiting his kids and managing custody arrangements. I thought I was dating a devoted father who was rebuilding his life after a difficult divorce." Jennifer's version of David's deception involved fictional children from a fictional previous marriage that justified his regular travel to Austin. While Catherine had been told David was traveling for business, Jennifer had been told he was traveling for family obligations that demonstrated his character as a committed parent. "He showed me photos of children he claimed were his from his previous marriage," Jennifer continued. "I now realize those must have been stock photos or pictures of other people's children. Everything about his past was completely fabricated." Marina found herself comparing Jennifer's experience to her own relationship with Alex, noting similarities in how sophisticated deceivers construct elaborate fictional frameworks to justify suspicious behavior patterns. Both David and Alex had created false narratives that positioned their lies as evidence of positive character traits rather than deceptive practices. "Lucas has been asking when Daddy David is coming back," Jennifer said. "How do I explain to a 7-year-old that someone he loved and trusted was living a lie the entire time? Lucas thought David was going to be his stepfather and that we were going to be a real family." Marina felt particular sympathy for Lucas, who'd been completely innocent of adult deceptions, but would suffer lasting consequences from David's choices. Children who formed attachments to adults living lies often struggled with trust issues that could affect their relationships for years. "I'm consulting with attorneys about potential civil action against David for fraud and emotional distress," Jennifer explained. "I lost 4 years of my life believing I was building a future with someone who was never actually available. The financial damages are significant, but the emotional harm to Lucas might be irreparable." Marina provided Jennifer with referrals to attorneys who specialized in size cases involving emotional manipulation and child welfare concerns. Jennifer's situation was more complex than Catherine's because she'd been deceived about David's fundamental identity rather than just his activities, creating grounds for civil claims beyond simple breach of relationship promises. "Did you ever suspect that David might be deceiving you about major aspects of his life?" Marina asked, curious about whether Jennifer had experienced the kind of intuitive warnings that Catherine had learned to recognize. "Looking back, there were signs I should have noticed," Jennifer admitted. "David was very secretive about his past and never provided verifiable information about his previous marriage or children."
He claimed to be protective of his ex-wife's privacy, which seemed thoughtful at the time, but was actually a way to avoid creating evidence of lies.
Jennifer's experience highlighted the difficulty of detecting sophisticated deception when the deceiver was skilled at providing plausible explanations for suspicious behavior. David had constructed fictional narratives that made his lies seem like evidence of positive character traits, making Jennifer feel guilty for questioning details that would have exposed his deception. "He made me feel selfish for wanting to meet his children or learn more about his past," Jennifer explained. "Whenever I asked questions about his previous marriage, he'd become emotional and talk about protecting his kids from adult relationship complications. I thought I was being supportive by not pressing for information he wasn't ready to share." Marina recognized the manipulation tactics Jennifer described. Sophisticated deceivers often used emotional manipulation to prevent their victims from asking questions that might expose lies. By positioning their secrecy as protection for others, they made their victims feel cruel for pursuing normal relationship transparency. 6 months after David's arrest, Marina received updates from both Catherine and Jennifer about the resolution of their respective legal cases. David had been sentenced to 3 years in prison for bigamy and embezzlement, with additional civil judgments requiring him to pay substantial damages to both women. Catherine had recovered most of the assets David had diverted and had received additional compensation for fraud-related damages. Her legal background had enabled her to pursue criminal charges aggressively while also securing maximum civil recovery for her financial losses. Jennifer had been awarded damages for fraud and emotional distress, including funds specifically designated for Lucas's future therapy and educational needs. The court had recognized that David's deception had caused lasting harm to a child who'd been innocent of adult relationship complications. "Lucas is seeing a child psychologist who specializes in helping kids process adult betrayal," Jennifer reported during a final phone conversation with Marina. "It's going to take time, but he's beginning to understand that David's disappearance wasn't his fault, and that adults sometimes make choices that hurt the people who love them." Marina was relieved that Lucas was receiving appropriate support for processing the emotional trauma of David's deception. Children who experienced abandonment by trusted adult figures often required professional help to develop healthy relationship patterns in the future. The David Walsh investigation had become one of Marina's most comprehensive marital fraud cases, involving multiple victims and complex criminal behavior that extended far beyond simple adultery. The systematic nature of David's deception and the sophisticated financial fraud involved had required forensic techniques that few investigators possessed. Marina's reputation for handling complex deception cases had grown significantly following the successful resolution of Catherine's investigation. Referrals from attorneys and previous clients had created a steady stream of similar cases involving suspected marital fraud and systematic deception. Each new case reinforced Marina's understanding that sophisticated deceivers followed predictable patterns of behavior that could be detected through comprehensive digital forensics and financial analysis. The skills she developed during her own painful discovery process had become valuable professional tools for helping other victims of systematic deception. The emotional satisfaction of providing truth and accountability to victims of marital fraud had become an important component of Marina's career motivation. Unlike corporate cases that involved abstract financial harm, personal deception investigations allowed her to provide direct assistance to individuals whose lives had been damaged by systematic lies. Marina had also developed specialized expertise in helping clients process the emotional complexity of discovering that trusted partners had been living elaborate lies. The combination of forensic investigation and emotional support had created a unique niche in Austin's legal community. The anniversary of Marina's own divorce had passed without the emotional difficulty she'd experienced in previous years. 3 years of rebuilding her life and helping other victims of deception had transformed her personal trauma into professional expertise that benefited people facing similar challenges. Standing in her office on a Friday afternoon, reviewing case files for the weekend ahead, Marina reflected on how completely her perspective on trust and relationships had evolved. The woman who'd once felt guilty for questioning her husband's obvious lies had become an expert at detecting deception and helping others recognize the signs of systematic betrayal. Her marriage to Alex had taught her that trust without verification was simply naivety,
and that healthy relationships required the ability to ask questions without being made to feel suspicious or controlling. The skills that had made her marriage feel toxic were exactly the skills that had enabled her to build a successful career helping others protect themselves from similar deception. The phone call from her attorney interrupted Marina's reflection, bringing news about a potential new case that would challenge her expertise in unexpected ways. A local judge was requesting consultation about a custody case involving suspected parental deception, with digital evidence that required specialized forensic analysis. The case involves a father who claims to have sole custody of twin daughters, but the mother suspects he's been deceiving the court about his living situation and fitness for custody, the attorney explained. Your reputation for uncovering complex deception has made you the preferred investigator for sensitive family court matters. Marina accepted the case immediately, recognizing the opportunity to protect children from adults whose deceptions could cause lasting harm. The investigation would require delicate handling of family dynamics and careful attention to child welfare concerns that went beyond simple evidence gathering. As Marina prepared to leave her office that Friday evening, she realized that her career had evolved far beyond the corporate digital forensics that had originally defined her expertise. The personal experience of discovering systematic deception had created opportunities to help others facing similar challenges. While building a professional reputation based on skills that few investigators possessed, the woman Alex had tried to diminish had become a recognized expert in detecting and documenting the kind of sophisticated deception that had destroyed her own marriage. The traits he'd found threatening were exactly what made her valuable to clients who needed truth rather than comfortable fiction. Marina locked her office and walked toward her car, thinking about the weekend ahead and the new custody case that would require all of her analytical skills. She'd built a life based on truth and evidence, surrounded by professional relationships that valued her expertise rather than resenting her questions. His second family had trusted Alex completely, just as Jennifer and Lucas had trusted David, and that trust had been systematically exploited by men who'd been incapable of honest relationships. The difference was that Marina had learned to trust her own instincts instead of other people's assurances, and that lesson had enabled her to help others avoid similar betrayals. The skills that had made her marriage feel toxic were exactly what made her exceptional at protecting others from deception and fraud. Clients sought her expertise specifically because she didn't accept surface explanations and insisted on comprehensive evidence before reaching conclusions. Marina's instincts about deception had been correct from the beginning, and learning to trust those instincts again had been the foundation of both her personal recovery and professional success. The woman who'd been made to feel paranoid for asking reasonable questions had built a career based on those exact qualities. As Marina drove toward her apartment, she felt the satisfaction that came from work that aligned with her natural abilities and personal values. The cases ahead would challenge her skills and provide opportunities to protect others from the kind of systematic deception that had once nearly destroyed her own life. The truth had momentum now, and Marina was positioned to ensure it continued rolling forward for everyone who needed it. The emergency call came at 11:30 on a Sunday night, disrupting Marina's quiet evening of reviewing forensic protocols for a complex corporate case scheduled to begin Monday morning. District Attorney Rebecca Santos spoke with the crisp urgency of someone accustomed to handling crisis situations that couldn't wait for regular business hours. "Marina, I need your expertise on a case that's becoming a political nightmare. We've got a sitting city council member accused of maintaining 3 separate families across Texas while embezzling municipal funds to support his elaborate deception. The media is circling, the mayor is demanding immediate action, and we need ironclad digital evidence that will hold up under the kind of scrutiny this case is going to generate." Marina set down her laptop and focused completely on Santos's explanation.
High-profile cases involving public officials required a level of precision and thoroughness that exceeded even her usual standards. Every piece of evidence would be examined by defense attorneys with unlimited resources and motivations to discredit both the investigation and the investigators. "How extensive is the suspected deception?" Marina asked, already mentally cataloging the resources and timeline such an investigation would require. Councilman Marcus Webb has been married to Patricia Webb here in Austin for 12 years. Simultaneously, he's been married to Carmen Flores in San Antonio for 8 years and Jennifer Morrison in Dallas for 6 years.
All three wives appear to believe they're in monogamous relationships, and all three families include children who consider Webb their primary father figure. The scope of Webb's alleged deception dwarfed even the complex cases Marina had handled previously. Maintaining three separate families across multiple cities would require logistical coordination, financial resources, and psychological compartmentalization that suggested either exceptional criminal sophistication or complete disconnection from reality. What triggered the investigation? Marina inquired, understanding that such complex deceptions were typically exposed through accidental discovery rather than systematic investigation. Webb's oldest daughter from his Austin marriage attended a youth leadership conference in Dallas last month. She met another girl who claimed to have the same father, with the same name, occupation, and physical description. The girls compared family photos and realized they were half-sisters with fathers who appeared to be the same person. Marina appreciated the irony of Webb's deception being exposed by the children he'd been deceiving. Young people often possessed clearer perception of obvious inconsistencies that adults rationalized or ignored, and their natural curiosity made them less susceptible to elaborate explanations for suspicious circumstances. The girls contacted each other's mothers, who compared notes and discovered identical marriage certificates, shared bank accounts, and family photos that told the same stories with different women and children, Santos continued. Patricia Webb contacted our office Friday afternoon, and by Saturday morning, we had complaints from all three wives alleging fraud, bigamy, and embezzlement. The timeline suggested that Webb's carefully constructed deception had collapsed rapidly once exposed, probably because he'd never anticipated the possibility that his different families might communicate with each other. Most sophisticated deceivers failed to account for coincidences beyond their control that could connect previously isolated victims. I need comprehensive digital forensics that document every aspect of Webb's deception, Santos explained. Financial records showing how he funded three households, communication evidence proving he misrepresented his availability to each wife, travel documentation establishing his movement between families, and most importantly, evidence that he used his position as city councilman to divert municipal resources for personal use. Marina accepted the case immediately, recognizing both the professional challenge and the opportunity to apply her expertise to a situation that could impact public trust in local government. Webb's behavior represented exactly the kind of systematic deception that her specialized skills were designed to detect and document. Monday morning, Marina arrived at her office before dawn to begin what would become the most complex and high-profile investigation of her career. Santos had provided emergency court orders granting access to Webb's financial records, digital devices, and municipal accounts that would normally require weeks of legal proceedings to obtain. The initial evidence review revealed organizational systems that impressed Marina with their complexity while horrifying her with their implications. Webb had been maintaining three separate identities, each with distinct financial accounts, phone numbers, social media profiles, and residential addresses. The level of compartmentalization suggested someone who'd been planning and executing elaborate deception for many years. Webb's financial records told the story of a man living far beyond his official income while supporting three families with expensive lifestyles. His city council salary of $85,000 annually couldn't possibly fund three mortgages, three luxury vehicles, private school tuition for 7 children, and the extensive travel required to maintain his deceptions. Marina's analysis revealed systematic diversion of municipal funds through a network of shell companies and fraudulent vendors that Webb had created to channel city contracts to his personal accounts. The embezzlement operation had been generating nearly $200,000 annually in unreported income that Webb had been using to fund his multiple families. The digital evidence was equally damning. Webb's phones contained separate contact lists for each family, with careful organization to prevent accidental communication between wives who weren't supposed to know about each other's existence. His calendar applications showed a color-coded system for tracking his obligations to each family, ensuring he never double-booked himself for events that might expose his deception. Most revealing were the social media accounts Webb had maintained for each identity. His Austin profile showed a devoted husband and father posting about family activities with Patricia and their children. His San Antonio account featured identical content with Carmen and her children. His Dallas presence portrayed the same loving family man role with Jennifer and their kids. Marina documented how Webb had been living essentially the same life 3 times, repeating birthday celebrations, holiday traditions, and family milestones with different women and children who each believed they were experiencing unique moments with their devoted husband and father. The psychological manipulation required to maintain such comprehensive deception while appearing genuinely loving to each family was almost incomprehensible. The investigation expanded when Marina discovered that Webb's deception extended beyond his personal relationships to include his professional obligations. As a city councilman, he'd been missing critical meetings and votes while attending family events in other cities, effectively abandoning his responsibilities to Austin taxpayers while drawing salary and benefits for work he wasn't performing. Municipal records showed that Webb had missed 40% of scheduled council meetings over the past 3 years, claiming medical emergencies or family crises that Marina's investigation proved were actually visits to his other families. The pattern of absences correlated perfectly with birthdays, school events, and holidays in San Antonio and Dallas. Marina's forensic analysis revealed that Webb had been falsifying medical documentation to justify his absences, submitting fraudulent physician statements and hospital records to support claims of health problems that required extended recovery periods. The medical fraud added federal charges to the growing list of crimes Webb would face. By the end of her first week investigating Webb's deception, Marina had documented a criminal enterprise that included bigamy, embezzlement, fraud, falsification of public records, and systematic breach of fiduciary duty to taxpayers. The evidence was so comprehensive that Santos's office had begun preparing multiple indictments that could result in decades of prison time. The emotional impact on Webb's families was devastating in ways that extended far beyond typical marital deception cases. Patricia Webb had been married to someone she'd never actually known, raising children with a father who'd been simultaneously raising other families. Carmen Flores had immigrated from Mexico and built her American dream around a marriage that had been completely fraudulent from the beginning. Jennifer Morrison had been a single mother who'd believed she'd found a devoted stepfather for her children from a previous relationship. All 3 women had been planning their lives around futures with a man who'd never been actually available for exclusive relationships. They'd made financial decisions, career choices, and family planning decisions based on promises from someone who'd been systematically lying about his most fundamental circumstances. The children were perhaps the most tragic victims of Webb's deception. 7 kids ranging in age from 4 to 15 had been raised believing they had a devoted father who loved them completely. They'd formed their understanding of family relationships, male authority figures, and trustworthiness based on interactions with someone who'd been performing rather than genuinely parenting. The girls contacted each other's mothers, who compared notes and discovered identical marriage certificates, shared bank accounts, and family photos that told the same stories with different women and children, Santos continued. Patricia Webb contacted our office Friday afternoon, and by Saturday morning, we had complaints from all 3 wives alleging fraud, bigamy, and embezzlement. The timeline suggested that Webb's carefully constructed deception had collapsed rapidly once exposed, probably because he'd never anticipated the possibility that his different families might communicate with each other. Most sophisticated deceivers failed to account for coincidences beyond their control that could connect previously isolated victims. I need comprehensive digital forensics that document every aspect of Webb's deception, Santos explained. Financial records showing how he funded 3 households, communication evidence proving he misrepresented his availability to each wife, travel documentation establishing his movement between families, and most importantly, evidence that he used his position as city councilman to divert municipal resources for personal use. Marina accepted the case immediately, recognizing both the professional challenge and the opportunity to apply her expertise to a situation that could impact public trust in local government. Webb's behavior represented exactly the kind of systematic deception that her specialized skills were designed to detect and document. Monday morning, Marina arrived at her office before dawn to begin what would become the most complex and high-profile investigation of her career. Santos had provided emergency court orders granting access to Webb's financial records, digital devices, and municipal accounts that would normally require weeks of legal proceedings to obtain. The initial evidence review revealed organizational systems that impressed Marina with their complexity while horrifying her with their implications. Webb had been maintaining 3 separate identities, each with distinct financial accounts, phone numbers, social media profiles, and residential addresses. The level of compartmentalization suggested someone who'd been planning and executing elaborate deception for many years. Webb's financial
Marina's investigation revealed that Webb had been particularly cruel in his manipulation of special occasions and emotional milestones. He'd attended multiple first communions, graduations, and birthday parties for different children on the same weekends, rushing between cities to maintain his fiction of devoted fatherhood while creating genuine memories for kids who'd believed those moments were unique and special. The logistical complexity of Webb's deception was staggering. Marina documented travel schedules that required split-second timing to maintain his various family obligations without exposing his lies. Flight records showed weekend trips where Webb would fly from Austin to Dallas Friday evening, drive to San Antonio Saturday morning, and return to Austin Sunday night, spending partial time with different families while claiming to be completely present for each one. Marina's forensic accounting revealed that Webb had been paying for his extensive travel through fraudulent municipal contracts that charged the city for consulting services that were never actually provided. He'd been essentially billing taxpayers for the costs of maintaining his multiple families while abandoning his official responsibilities to pursue personal relationships. The investigation took on additional complexity when Marina discovered that Webb had been planning to expand his deception by pursuing a 4th relationship in Houston. Dating app profiles and communication records showed that he'd been developing an online relationship with a woman named Lisa Chen, apparently intending to add a 4th family to his already overwhelming logistical challenges. Webb's communications with Lisa revealed the same pattern of emotional manipulation he'd used with his 3 wives. He'd presented himself as a successful businessman dealing with complex family obligations that required extensive travel, positioning his suspicious behavior as evidence of his devotion to family responsibilities rather than systematic deception. Marina realized that Webb's deception had been escalating rather than stabilizing, suggesting that he'd been addicted to the process of creating new relationships and identities rather than satisfied with maintaining his existing families. The psychology of someone who would deliberately create increasingly complex deceptions while abandoning real relationships was something that forensic investigation could document but not fully explain. 2 weeks into the investigation, Marina received an unexpected call from Webb himself, apparently seeking to understand the scope of the case being built against him. His attorney had advised him to avoid direct communication with investigators, but Webb's apparent confidence in his ability to manipulate people had overcome his legal counsel's recommendations. "Miss Voss, I understand you're handling the digital forensics on my case," Webb said, with the smooth tone of a politician accustomed to managing difficult conversations. "I was hoping we could discuss the situation and perhaps clarify some misunderstandings that seem to have developed." Marina had been expecting this call since learning of Webb's manipulative personality through her investigation. Sophisticated deceivers often believed they could charm or manipulate investigators just as they'd deceived their personal victims. Webb's willingness to contact her directly suggested he hadn't yet grasped the hopelessness of his legal situation. "Mr. Webb, I'm conducting a forensic investigation based on evidence, not interpretations that can be clarified through conversation," Marina replied with professional neutrality. "If you have information relevant to the case, you should discuss it with your attorney." "I think you might not understand the complexity of the situation," Webb continued, apparently undeterred by Marina's professional boundaries. "These women are making accusations based on emotional reactions rather than factual understanding of my circumstances. I've been dealing with complicated family obligations that required discretion to protect everyone involved." Marina recognized Webb's attempt to reframe his systematic deception as protective behavior, the same manipulation tactic she'd seen in other cases involving sophisticated deceivers. Webb was apparently attempting to position his lies as evidence of thoughtfulness rather than cruelty, hoping to convince Marina that her investigation was based on misunderstanding rather than criminal behavior.
"The evidence speaks for itself, Mr. Webb," Marina replied calmly. "My investigation is based on financial records, digital communications, and documented behavior patterns rather than anyone's emotional reactions or interpretations." Webb's tone shifted from charming politician to something more desperate as he realized Marina wouldn't be manipulated by the same techniques that had worked on his victims. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. I've been protecting these families from information that would have hurt them. My intentions have always been to provide love and support without causing unnecessary pain." Marina ended the call without further discussion, but Webb's words reinforced her understanding of how deeply disconnected he was from the reality of his actions. Someone who could describe systematic deception and emotional manipulation as protective behavior was either completely delusional or utterly lacking in empathy for the people he'd been harming. The conversation with Webb also revealed his continued belief that he could manipulate the situation through personal charm and political connections. Marina's investigation had shown that Webb had been using his city council position to intimidate potential critics and suppress complaints about his behavior, suggesting a pattern of abusing public trust that extended beyond his personal relationships. Marina's final week of investigation focused on documenting the full scope of damage Webb had caused to both his families and the community he'd been elected to serve. The financial losses to the city exceeded $300,000 in fraudulent contracts and unauthorized expenses. The emotional trauma to his 3 families would require years of therapy and support to process. The evidence Marina assembled filled over 2,000 pages of documentation, including financial analysis, digital communications, travel records, and testimony from victims who'd been systematically deceived by someone they'd trusted completely. The case file was so comprehensive that Webb's defense attorneys had already begun negotiating plea agreements rather than attempting to contest charges they knew were unwinnable. District Attorney Santos called Marina Friday afternoon to report that Webb had been arrested at a city council meeting Thursday evening, taken into custody in front of his political colleagues and local media representatives who'd been tipped off about the dramatic conclusion to the investigation. "The media coverage has been extraordinary," Santos reported. "Every major news outlet in Texas is covering the story, and several national publications are picking it up as an example of how public corruption intersects with personal deception. Your forensic work has been mentioned specifically as the key to building an unassailable case." Marina was gratified that her work had contributed to exposing corruption that affected both individual families and community trust in local government. The Webb investigation had required every specialized skill she developed through years of handling complex deception cases, and the successful outcome validated her approach to comprehensive digital forensics. The public attention generated by Webb's arrest led to immediate referrals for similar cases involving suspected public corruption and personal deception. Marina's reputation for handling high-profile investigations with discretion and thoroughness had created opportunities to work with state and federal agencies on cases that required her unique expertise. 3 months after Webb's arrest, Marina received an invitation that surprised her with both its prestige and its personal significance. The Texas Association of Digital Forensics Investigators had selected her to receive their annual award for excellence in complex case investigation, recognizing her work on the Webb case as an example of how forensic expertise could serve both individual justice and public accountability. The award ceremony was held in Dallas at the state's premier conference for law enforcement and legal professionals. Marina's acceptance speech would be delivered to an audience that included prosecutors, investigators, and forensic specialists from throughout the region. The opportunity to share her insights about detecting systematic deception would potentially influence how other professionals approached similar cases. Marina spent considerable time preparing her presentation, focusing on the investigative techniques that had proven most effective for uncovering complex personal and financial deception. Her speech emphasized the importance of comprehensive documentation, systematic analysis, and emotional resilience when dealing with cases that involved systematic manipulation of trust. The evening of the awards ceremony, Marina stood before an audience of 300 professionals who specialized in uncovering truth and providing accountability for criminal behavior. As she accepted the award recognizing her contributions to forensic investigation, she reflected on the journey that had brought her from personal victimization to professional expertise. The conversation with Webb also revealed his continued belief that he could manipulate the situation through personal charm and political connections. Marina's investigation had shown that Webb had been using his city council position to intimidate potential critics and suppress complaints about his behavior, suggesting a pattern of abusing public trust that extended beyond his personal relationships. Marina's final week of investigation focused on documenting the full scope of damage Webb had caused to both his families and the community he'd been elected to serve.
The financial losses to the city exceeded $300,000 in fraudulent contracts and unauthorized expenses. The emotional trauma to his 3 families would require years of therapy and support to process. The evidence Marina assembled filled over 2,000 pages of documentation, including financial analysis, digital communications, travel records, and testimony from victims who'd been systematically deceived by someone they'd trusted completely. The case file was so comprehensive that Webb's defense attorneys had already begun negotiating plea agreements rather than attempting to contest charges they knew were unwinnable. District Attorney Santos called Marina Friday afternoon to report that Webb had been arrested at a city council meeting Thursday evening, taken into custody in front of his political colleagues and local media representatives who'd been tipped off about the dramatic conclusion to the investigation. The media coverage has been extraordinary, Santos reported. Every major news outlet in Texas is covering the story, and several national publications are picking it up as an example of how public corruption intersects with personal dysfunction. Your forensic work has been mentioned specifically as the key to building an unassailable case. Marina was gratified that her work had contributed to exposing corruption that affected both individual families and community trust in local government. The Webb investigation had required every specialized skill she'd developed through years of handling complex deception cases, and the successful outcome validated her approach to comprehensive digital forensics. The public attention generated by Webb's arrest led to immediate referrals for similar cases involving suspected public corruption and personal deception. Marina's reputation for handling high-profile investigations with discretion and thoroughness had created opportunities to work with state and federal agencies on cases that required her unique expertise. 3 months after Webb's arrest, Marina received an invitation that surprised her with both its prestige and its personal significance. The Texas
Complex deception cases require investigators who understand that sophisticated deceivers follow predictable patterns, even when their behavior seems uniquely disturbing, Marina explained to the attentive audience. The skills required to detect systematic deception are the same skills that make someone appear suspicious or controlling in personal relationships. Learning to trust those instincts professionally while maintaining appropriate boundaries personally is essential for effectiveness in this field. Marina's speech resonated with professionals who'd struggled with similar challenges in balancing investigative instincts with personal relationships. The standing ovation she received reflected both appreciation for her professional achievements and recognition of the personal courage required to transform trauma into expertise that served others. Following the ceremony, Marina was approached by colleagues from throughout Texas who were dealing with cases that required her specialized skills. The network of professional relationships she'd built through years of careful work had created opportunities to influence how deception investigations were conducted across multiple jurisdictions. Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, a forensic psychologist from Houston, introduced herself as someone who'd been following Marina's work and was interested in collaboration on cases but required both digital forensics and psychological analysis of sophisticated deceivers. Your approach to documenting behavioral patterns in complex deception cases aligns perfectly with psychological profiling techniques I've been developing for family court proceedings, Dr. Morgan explained. I think we could offer comprehensive services that address both the technical evidence and the emotional impact of systematic deception. Marina was intrigued by the possibility of expanding her practice to include psychological expertise that could help victims process the complex emotions associated with discovering that trusted partners had been living elaborate lies. The collaboration would allow her to offer more complete services while learning from someone whose background complemented her own skills. 6 months later, Marina and Dr. Morgan had established a partnership that specialized in comprehensive investigation and recovery services for victims of complex personal deception. Their combined expertise in digital forensics and trauma psychology had created a unique practice that addressed both the legal and emotional aspects of marital fraud, family deception, and related crimes. The partnership's first major case involved a prominent Austin surgeon who'd been maintaining 4 separate families across 3 states while embezzling from his medical practice to fund his elaborate lifestyle. The investigation required Marina's technical skills and Dr. Morgan's psychological expertise to understand both the logistical aspects of the deception and the emotional manipulation techniques that had enabled such comprehensive victimization.
Marina's investigation revealed financial fraud that exceeded $500,000, while Dr. Morgan's analysis documented psychological abuse that had left multiple victims questioning their own perceptions and decision-making abilities. The comprehensive approach provided both criminal evidence and therapeutic insights that supported the victim's recovery process. The success of their collaborative approach led to referrals from throughout the region, establishing Marina and Dr. Morgan as specialists in cases that required both technical investigation and psychological support. Their reputation attracted clients dealing with the most complex and damaging forms of personal deception, including cases involving professional misconduct, public corruption, and systematic family fraud. Marina's personal life had also evolved significantly during the years since her divorce from Alex. The confidence and self-awareness she developed through professional success had enabled her to build healthy relationships with people who appreciated her analytical nature rather than feeling threatened by her investigative instincts. Dr. James Patterson, a professor of computer science at the University of Texas, had become a significant presence in Marina's life through their collaboration on developing improved digital forensics techniques for law enforcement agencies. Their relationship had grown slowly and naturally, based on mutual respect for each other's professional expertise and shared commitment to using technology for protecting rather than exploiting vulnerable people. James's understanding of Marina's work and his appreciation for the skills that made her exceptional professionally had created the foundation for a relationship that felt completely different from her marriage to Alex. Where Alex had felt threatened by Marina's analytical nature and investigative instincts, James was fascinated by her ability to detect patterns and uncover hidden information. You see things that other people miss because you're willing to look carefully at evidence that makes others uncomfortable, James had observed during one of their early conversations about her work. That's not suspicious or controlling behavior, it's professional expertise that helps people who can't protect themselves from sophisticated deception. James's validation of Marina's professional instincts had been healing in ways she hadn't expected. For years, Alex's criticism had made her question whether her natural analytical tendencies were healthy or problematic. James's perspective helped her understand that the skills Alex had found threatening were exactly what made her valuable to clients and colleagues who needed comprehensive investigation services. Their relationship had developed through shared interests in technology, justice, and using professional skills to benefit others rather than seeking personal advantage. James's academic background provided intellectual stimulation that complemented Marina's practical investigative experience, creating conversations that enhanced both of their professional development. Marina had been careful to maintain appropriate boundaries between her personal and professional lives, ensuring that her relationship with James didn't compromise her objectivity or independence. The lessons she'd learned about trust and verification had made her more thoughtful about how relationships develop and how much access partners should have to sensitive professional information. The balance between openness and discretion that Marina had achieved with James felt sustainable in ways her marriage to Alex never had. Where Alex had demanded complete trust without earning it through consistent behavior, James had demonstrated trustworthiness through years of reliable actions and transparent communication about his own work and interests. 2 years after beginning their collaboration, Marina and Dr. Morgan were invited to present their integrated approach to deception investigation at the National Conference on Forensic Psychology in Washington, D.C. The invitation represented recognition of their innovative methods and successful outcomes in cases that had previously been considered too complex for effective intervention. Their presentation focused on the importance of addressing both the technical evidence and psychological impact of systematic deception, emphasizing that victims needed both legal accountability and therapeutic support to recover from sophisticated manipulation. The audience included federal investigators, prosecutors, and mental health professionals who were dealing with increasingly complex cases involving personal and financial fraud. Sophisticated deceivers often target victims who possess exactly the qualities that make them effective in professional settings, Marina explained to the conference audience. Intelligence, attention to detail, and analytical thinking can actually make someone more vulnerable to systematic manipulation because they assume others share their commitment to honesty and logical consistency. Dr. Morgan's portion of the presentation addressed the psychological techniques that enabled comprehensive deception while maintaining victims' trust and cooperation. Sophisticated manipulators often use their victims' strengths against them, making analytical people feel paranoid for asking logical questions and making trusting people feel cruel for demanding verification of obvious inconsistencies. The conference presentation led to consulting opportunities with federal agencies that were developing improved techniques for investigating complex fraud cases involving personal relationships and public trust. Marina's expertise in digital forensics had attracted attention from organizations that needed specialized skills for cases that crossed multiple jurisdictions and advanced criminal behavior. The Department of Justice invited Marina to serve as a consultant on cases involving elected officials who'd been accused of using public resources to support private deceptions. Her work on the web investigation had demonstrated the kind of comprehensive approach needed for cases that involved both personal and professional misconduct by people in positions of public trust. Marina accepted the federal consulting role while maintaining her private practice and partnership with Dr. Morgan. The diversity of cases she was handling provided opportunities to refine her investigative techniques while contributing to broader efforts to combat corruption and fraud that damaged both individual victims and public institutions. 5 years after her divorce from Alex, Marina had built a career that exceeded anything she'd imagined during her darkest moments of personal betrayal.
The woman who'd been made to feel paranoid for questioning obvious inconsistencies had become a recognized expert in detecting and documenting the kinds of sophisticated deception that damaged individuals, families, and communities. Her reputation extended beyond Texas to include consulting work with agencies throughout the United States, training programs for law enforcement personnel, and speaking engagements at professional conferences where her insights influenced how other investigators approached complex cases. The skills that Alex had found threatening were exactly what had enabled Marina to build professional relationships based on mutual respect and shared commitment to uncovering truth. Marina's personal life had also achieved a stability and satisfaction that felt completely different from her marriage to Alex. Her relationship with James had developed into a partnership based on genuine appreciation for each other's professional expertise and personal qualities, without the manipulation and deception that had characterized her previous marriage. The contrast between her current relationship and her marriage to Alex provided daily reminders of how much she'd grown since discovering his betrayal. Where Alex had made her feel guilty for asking reasonable questions about suspicious behavior, James encouraged her analytical thinking and appreciated her ability to detect patterns and inconsistencies that others missed. James's proposal came during a quiet evening at Marina's apartment, as they were working together on a research project that combined her forensic expertise with his computer science background. The engagement ring he offered was a custom design that incorporated circuit board patterns similar to the one Alex had given her years earlier, but the meaning was completely different. "I want to spend my life with someone whose intelligence and integrity make the world a safer place," James said, as Marina examined the ring that represented their shared values and complementary skills. "Your ability to see through deception and find truth is one of the things I love most about you." Marina accepted James's proposal with gratitude for finding someone who valued the qualities that Alex had tried to suppress. The wedding they planned would celebrate a partnership based on mutual respect, shared goals, and appreciation for each other's professional expertise, rather than competition or manipulation. Their wedding ceremony was held in the same computer lab where Marina had first met Alex years earlier, but the symbolism was completely different. Where her relationship with Alex had been based on her adaptation to his needs and goals, her partnership with James represented mutual support for each other's individual growth and shared commitment to using their skills for protecting others. Dr. Morgan served as Marina's maid of honor, representing the professional partnership that had enabled Marina to transform her personal trauma into expertise that served others. The ceremony included colleagues from law enforcement, academia, and victim advocacy organizations who'd worked with Marina on cases that required her specialized skills. Marina's wedding speech acknowledged the journey that had brought her from personal victimization to professional expertise and personal happiness based on authentic relationships rather than deceptive manipulation. "Learning to trust my own instincts about deception and inconsistency was the foundation for everything good that's happened in my life since then." 6 months after their wedding, Marina and James received an opportunity that would test their partnership in unexpected ways. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had been developing a task force focused on complex fraud cases that involved both personal deception and professional misconduct by people in positions of public trust.
Marina's expertise in digital forensics and James's background in computer science had made them ideal candidates for leading the technical investigation component of the task force. The position would require relocation to Washington, D.C., and acceptance of security clearances that would enable work on cases involving national security implications of personal and professional deception. The opportunity represented the pinnacle of recognition for Marina's expertise, while providing chances to influence how federal agencies approached investigations of sophisticated fraud. Marina and James accepted the federal positions after careful consideration of how the move would impact their personal relationship and individual career goals. The task force work would provide opportunities to apply their skills to cases with broader significance while maintaining their partnership in both professional and personal contexts. Their first major federal case involved a State Department official who'd been maintaining multiple identities to conduct unauthorized foreign business relationships while providing classified information to foreign contacts in exchange for financial support for his elaborate personal lifestyle. The investigation required Marina's digital forensic skills and James's technical expertise to trace complex international financial transactions and communication networks. The case revealed deception that extended far beyond personal relationships to include systematic betrayal of national security responsibilities and professional obligations to public service. Marina's investigation documented how the official had been using his security clearances to access information that he'd been selling to foreign contacts, while maintaining fictitious explanations for his suspicious behavior to family members and colleagues. The successful resolution of their first federal case established Marina and James as valuable assets for investigations that required comprehensive technical analysis and innovative approaches to detecting sophisticated deception. Their partnership had enabled them to handle cases that exceeded the capabilities of traditional investigation teams, while maintaining the personal relationship that provided emotional support for demanding work. Marina's federal work had also provided opportunities to influence how agencies approached investigations of systematic deception, incorporating lessons she'd learned from personal experience with sophisticated manipulation and years of professional development in detecting complex fraud. Her insights were being integrated into training programs for federal investigators who needed improved techniques for handling cases involving elaborate personal and professional deception. The recognition Marina had achieved through her federal work represented complete vindication of the analytical instincts and investigative skills that Alex had tried to suppress during their marriage. The qualities he'd found threatening were exactly what had enabled her to build a career that served others, while achieving personal satisfaction and professional recognition that exceeded anything they'd accomplished together. Standing in her office at the Federal Bureau of Investigation 7 years after discovering Alex's betrayal, Marina reflected on the complete transformation of her life and career. The woman who'd been made to feel paranoid for questioning obvious inconsistencies had become a federal expert in detecting the kinds of sophisticated deception that threatened both individual victims and national security. Her marriage to James had provided the stable foundation she'd needed to pursue professional challenges while maintaining the personal relationships that gave meaning to her work. The contrast between her current partnership and her previous marriage provided daily reminders of how much she'd grown and how completely she'd recovered from the trauma of systematic betrayal. Marina's expertise was now being sought by agencies throughout the federal government for cases that required comprehensive digital forensics and innovative approaches to detecting complex deception. The skills that had made her marriage to Alex feel toxic were exactly what made her valuable to organizations that needed truth rather than comfortable fiction. The phone call that interrupted Marina's reflection brought news of another complex case that would challenge her expertise in unexpected ways. A federal judge was requesting consultation about a custody case that involved suspected international child abduction and systematic deception about parental identity and national citizenship status. Marina accepted the case immediately, recognizing the opportunity to protect children from adults whose deceptions could cause lasting harm while applying her skills to challenges that required both technical expertise and innovative thinking. The work ahead would test every skill she'd developed while providing opportunities to help victims of sophisticated manipulation. As Marina prepared to begin another complex investigation, she realized that her career had evolved into exactly the kind of meaningful work she'd dreamed of during her early days with Alex. The difference was that she'd achieved professional success through her own expertise rather than supporting someone else's ambitions, and her personal relationships were based on mutual respect rather than manipulation and deception. The woman Alex tried to diminish had become a federal expert whose insights influenced how sophisticated deception was detected and documented throughout the United States. The traits he'd found threatening were exactly what made her exceptional at protecting others from the kinds of systematic betrayal that had once nearly destroyed her own life. Marina's instincts about deception had been correct from the beginning, and learning to trust those instincts had been the foundation of both her personal recovery and professional achievement. The skills that had made her marriage feel toxic were exactly what made her valuable to people who needed truth and accountability rather than comfortable fiction. His second family had trusted Alex completely, just as all sophisticated deceivers' victims trust their manipulators until the lies become impossible to maintain. The difference was that Marina had learned to verify trust through evidence rather than accepting assurances, and that lesson had enabled her to build a life based on authentic relationships and meaningful work. The cases ahead would challenge Marina's expertise while providing opportunities to protect others from sophisticated deception and help victims recover from systematic manipulation. Her partnership with James and her federal colleagues had created a foundation for work that aligned with her values while utilizing the skills that made her exceptional at detecting truth in complex situations. The truth had momentum now, rolling forward through every case Marina handled and every victim she helped achieve justice and recovery. The woman who'd been made to feel paranoid for asking reasonable questions had built a career based on those exact qualities, providing accountability for people whose deceptions damaged individuals, families, and institutions throughout society. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.